What were you wearing? Did you flirt with him? Were you out late? Unfortunately, these are only a few of the questions we hear when someone speaks about their personal experiences on sexual harassment. Such circumstances only show that some may still be far from understanding that sexual harassment is never the victim's fault. Rather, the perpetrators should be the ones held accountable for their acts. Girls and women face these silent battles daily. Catcalls, sexual advances in offices or schools, and even groping in public transports, among many others. In this 3-part video series, we will be discussing 2 laws that may aid Filipino women and girls in combating these forms of sexual harassment. These are the Safe Spaces Act, also known as Republic Act 11313, and the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, or Republic Act 7877. First, let's discuss what sexual harassment is. According to the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, it can be classified into 2 forms. The first one being the work-related or in-employment sexual harassment. This is committed when an employer, employee, manager, supervisor, agent of the employee, or anyone having authority, influence, or moral ascendancy over another in a work environment demands, requests, or requires sexual favors from another in exchange for employment, re-employment, continued employment, or granting favorable compensation, terms of condition, promotions, or privileges. Refusal to accept such favors would often lead to discrimination, such as deprivation of employment opportunities, abuse of rights under the labor law, and creating a work environment that is intimidating, hostile, or offensive to the victim. The second classification is the in education or training environment sexual harassment. This form of sexual harassment is committed when a teacher, instructor, professor, coach, trainer, or anyone having authority, influence, or moral ascendancy demands, requests, or requires sexual favors from a student in exchange for giving a passing grade, or the payment of a stipend or allowance, and granting of honors, scholarships, along with other benefits such as privileges and considerations. Any person who influences another person to commit any act of sexual harassment or who cooperated to commit the act will also be held liable under the law. Additionally, the Civil Service Commission Resolution Number 01-0940 or the Administrative Disciplinary Rules on Sexual Harassment Cases mandates government offices and agencies to devise uniform rules and regulations, particularly in the definition of the administrative offense of sexual harassment and the sanctions thereof, and the procedures for the administrative investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of sexual harassment cases. Despite these protective mechanisms for women and girls in the work and the educational environment, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act has notable gaps. First, its definition of sexual harassment is limited. Second, only persons in authority or with moral ascendancy could be charged as offenders. Third, it says that an offense could only be committed in a workplace, educational, or training environment. So to strengthen the law, legislators in the country enacted Republic Act No. 11313 or the Safe Spaces Act, commonly known as the Bawal Bastos Law. The Bawal Bastos Law expands the definition of sexual harassment, which now includes gender-based harassment. Gender-based sexual harassment includes catcalling, wolf whistling, unwanted invitations, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic and sexist slurs, persistent uninvited comments or gestures in a person's appearance, relentless requests for personal details, statement of sexual comments and suggestions, public masturbation or exposing of private parts, groping, or any verbal or physical advances that are unwanted and has threatened one's sense of personal space and physical safety. Under the Bawal Bastos Law, sexual harassment acts can be committed in public spaces such as streets and alleys, parks, schools, buildings, churches, malls, bars, restaurants, transportation terminals, public markets, government offices, public utility vehicles, as well as private vehicles covered by app-based network services, and other privately owned places open to the public such as cinema halls, theaters, and spas. Moreover, its coverage extends to the cyberspace, such as social media platforms. Online gender-based sexual harassment includes acts that use the information and communications technology to cause another person's mental, emotional, or psychological distress. This consists of unwanted sexual, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks and online comments, whether publicly or through private messages, invasion of victims' privacy through cyberstalking and incessant messaging, uploading and sharing without the consent of the victim any form of media that contains photos, voice, or video with sexual content, any unauthorized recording and sharing of any of the victim's photos, videos, or any information online, impersonating identities of victims online or posting lies about victims to harm their reputation, and filing false abuse reports to online platforms to silence victims. Furthermore, the Bawal Bastos Law now charges anyone as an offender, as opposed to the anti-sexual harassment law, recognizing only individuals with moral ascendancy as qualified perpetrators. It is important to note, however, that the Bawal Bastos Law exempts, first, acts that are legitimate expressions of indigenous culture and tradition, and second is breastfeeding in public. Now, we've seen the many phases of sexual harassment. It is a traumatizing experience that can cause victims to suffer significant psychological effects. In the Philippines, some people continue to find humor in situations involving sexual harassment, while neglecting the implications of the experience on the victims and to those around them. Aside from this, sexual harassment jokes are proven to have detrimental social costs. Research has shown that this kind of misogynistic humor reinforces some readiness of males to commit rape. Hence, when it is the law enforcers, public servants, and leaders like the president of the country who make such jokes that demean women, sexual or not, its social cost is even greater. For the next part, we will discuss how perpetrators of sexual harassment are penalized and what specific actions victims should do to address their situation.